Fate's Time Machine, where we travel deep into the past to uncover the stories that shaped our world. Today, we're diving into the life of King Henry VIII, a ruler known for his 6 wives, his break from the Catholic Church, his wars, his obsessions, his paranoia, and his physical transformation from athletic prince to near immobile tyrant. But there is a side of Henry VIII that people rarely hear about, a side shaped by childhood trauma, political pressure, and one horrifying moment that may have changed his brain forever. At least I think so. This is the full story of Henry VIII, told from the beginning. So, Henry VIII was born June 28th, 1491. He was the second son of Henry VII, England's first Tudor king. So the Tudors were basically the family lineage that he came from. So he was the first Tudor king. Henry wasn't just not the heir. He was barely involved in the preparation for kingship at all, because they were working so hard to prepare his younger brother Arthur for kingship. Henry was just pushed to the side. A lot of people like to say he wasn't the heir, but he was just a spare. He was there just in case Prince Arthur passed away. Kind of interesting that I say that. Henry was originally intended for a career in the church. He learned theology, Latin, scripture, and music far more seriously than any royal administration. Henry's childhood was surprisingly quiet. It was filled with books, music, languages, like I said, theology, and sport. He was a handsome, athletic, and extremely talented person, an extremely intelligent person. Some ambassadors even called him the most accomplished prince in Christendom. I don't know if I said that right, but we're going to go with it. His older brother, Prince Arthur, was the one groomed for the throne, trained in politics, diplomacy, and kingship since the age of 3. But in 1502, Arthur died suddenly at only age 15. Henry, age 10 at the time, instantly became the heir, thrust into a destiny that he had not been shaped for. His destiny shifted, and the quiet, bookish second son was about to become one of Europe's most dramatic rulers. Henry VII was terrified of losing another son. He became extremely controlling. He rarely allowed Henry public appearances, rarely trusted him with any responsibility, and he kept him under a very tight supervision. Henry started to grow up longing for freedom, athletic competition, glory, and recognition that he had in his youth. It was taken away like that. His hunger for greatness would follow him for life. Henry VII unexpectedly died in 1509. 17-year-old Henry VIII stepped onto the throne with explosive energy. See, Henry VII didn't just have his extreme controlling, not really trusting people, tight supervision. That wasn't just for That wasn't just for Henry VIII. That was just for his kingdom. He acted like that to all the people. So when he died and the well-liked Henry VIII came onto the throne, people adored him. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered, muscular, a champion jouster and wrestler, a gifted singer and composer, fluent in multiple languages. Not only that, he spent money freely. Too freely. He hosted tournaments, feasts, massive court spectacles, similar to what some might call royal sporting events. To Europe, Henry looked like a true Renaissance ideal king. So something that people don't really know a whole lot about Henry VIII is that he actually, in this time, wrote a book called The Defense of the Seven Sacraments. This was him criticizing Martin Luther prior to after Martin Luther did all his mailing the theses to the church. But this was before King Henry VIII eventually split from the Catholic Church. More on that here in a minute. And the Pope, at the time, when he wrote this book, gave him the title of Defender of the Faith, which a lot of British monarchs still use to this day. Henry truly saw himself as God's chosen prince. The Defender of Faith title is going to be funny here in a little bit when we learn a little bit more about him and the Pope. So, at this time, Henry became king when he was 17 years old. And just 2 months into his reign, he married his first wife, who was actually his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon. The reason Henry chose to still marry Catherine of Aragon, so after Henry's brother died, his father wanted Henry to marry Catherine of Aragon. But technically, biblically at the time, it was wrong to marry your brother's widow. And so they had to get special permission from the Pope, and the Pope helping him out, had to get special permission from the Pope for him to marry Catherine of Aragon. And you may say, well, his dad's dead. Why did he still decide to marry her? Well, he decided to marry her because he had truly come to love her. This was one of we don't know how many love marriages there were in ancient times, but we can say for a fact this one was one. And it was very rare at this time for a king or queen to marry for love, or a prince or princess or anyone. Marriage was a political bargaining tool. So the fact that he was able to marry for love should seem like he's being set up for a pretty good life. But one thing began to haunt him very early. He needed a male heir. So Henry faced a lot of pressure to have a male heir. Their marriage was politically beneficial. And he did genuinely have affection for Catherine in the early years. But his pressure to have a son became unbearable. Dynasties rose and fell on heirs back in the day. And Henry VIII believed that the Tudors could collapse if he didn't produce a male successor. I'm going to let you know right there, that might be foreshadowing. So, he married Catherine of Aragon on June 11th, 1509. Catherine was a strong, deeply religious, politically savvy woman. And for 24 years, they were married for 24 years. She stood by Henry's side through war, diplomacy, and tragedy. She gave birth to several children, but only Mary, who was born in 1516, survived infancy. Henry grew increasingly more desperate for a male heir. Henry interpreted every failed pregnancy as a sign that God was angry with their marriage. You combine this with Henry starting to have a growing infatuation for a young lady in wait called Anne Boleyn, and the stage was set for one of the greatest religious ruptures in English history. This obsession that began the spark for England's relationship and the Catholic Church being split. See, Henry wanted to divorce his wife. He got it annulled on July 23rd, 1533. But to get a divorce back then, he had to have permission from the Pope. So Henry asked one of the cardinals to go ahead and allow him to divorce his wife so he could marry Anne Boleyn. So, interestingly enough, Anne Boleyn was not technically his mistress. To our knowledge, he never did anything that he shouldn't physically with her. Verbally, yes. Physically, no. And so he asked the Cardinal Wolsey, if he could get a divorce. And he expected Cardinal Wolsey to Just say yes, not go back to the Pope. Well, Cardinal Wolsey did go back to the Pope. And at that time, the Pope was under control by one of Catherine of Aragon's cousins, if I'm not mistaken. It's one of her family members. Um, so this then became not just a divorce between him and his wife, but a very, very public divorce. There was a trial to determine if um, he should have even been allowed to be married to Catherine. And so, because of that, and because it didn't go his way, Henry decided to split from the Catholic Church and create his own religion. Tried to basically create an offshoot of Christianity. Um, he even had his own Bible. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but if you look up King Henry's Bible that he created, it's really interesting because there's just many different depictions on it. It's a really cool thing to look at. I would highly suggest looking it up. But I'll continue. So he officially got divorced on July 23rd, 1533 from Catherine of Aragon. And by January 25th of 1533, he was... Oh, that was interesting. I didn't even notice this whenever I was reading. He technically married Anne Boleyn before the marriage was annulled, if I'm reading this correctly. Huh, I never caught that. Well, that's interesting. I guess that this was probably in the time when he was going through and creating his own religion and everything. But based on this, he was married to Anne Boleyn starting in January 25th, 1533. Anne was witty, educated, politically ambitious, and not at all the quiet traditional Catherine. Not anything like quiet traditional Catherine. Henry was infatuated with her, even writing her love letters begging for her affection. This was what I'm talking about, where he didn't physically do anything he shouldn't have done, but verbally he did. But Anne refused to be his mistress. So she basically said, you have to divorce your wife before anything with us. Henry wanted to marry her. Like I said, the Pope refused the annulment. So Henry broke from the church, and he proceeded to seize a lot of the church land and declared himself the head of the new Church of England, and married Anne in secret. Oh, that's why it's different. That's interesting. Never caught that. It's because he married her in secret. The only thing is, he still needed a son. Anne gave birth to Elizabeth in 1533, but she didn't give birth to a son. And political enemies swarmed, and Henry grew cold. Accusations almost certainly fabricated claimed Anne committed adultery, treason, and even incest. And because of this, she was executed in 1536. Henry's charm was fading, and a dark side was emerging. You may wonder, what happened to the man who was okay with divorce? Why did all of a sudden he decide that he needed to kill her? So Anne was executed on May 19th, 1536, just a few months earlier. There's an incident that I believe changed his mind and his body forever. On January 24th, 1536, at Greenwich Palace, in a jousting event, Henry, wearing well over 80 pounds of armor, rode out on his war horse, and in a moment of chaos, he was thrown violently from the horse, and the massive animal then fell directly onto King Henry, crushing him. He was unconscious for hours, and some reports even say his attendants thought he might die on the spot. In modern medical analysis, a lot of historians and doctors believe Henry potentially suffered a severe traumatic brain injury, or a TBI. The symptoms that he displayed afterwards were sudden and explosive temper, paranoia, impulsivity, inability to regulate his emotions, chronic pain, depression, cognitive decline, memory issues, and loss of his impulse control. TBIs can fundamentally alter personality. It may explain sudden transformation from the charismatic prince to the now known paranoid tyrant. His leg also developed a wound that ulcerated, not an English major, for the rest of his life, oozing pus and never healing. It caused him immense pain. So he barely was able to exercise afterwards. It led to a lot of extreme weight gain. And after 1536, Henry VIII was fundamentally a different man. Within months of the fall of Anne Boleyn, Henry was the Henry we remember most emerged. Um, sorry, I'm going to say that one more time. After 1536, Henry VIII was fundamentally a different man. Within months of the fall of Anne Boleyn, Henry that we remember emerged. This was the turning point that may have created the tyrant that we remember today. Now, I know some of you may be questioning, that's a bit of a stretch. I would also argue that we have seen people in modern time have potentially traumatic brain injuries, and seemingly their personality has been altered. One that comes to mind if you watch football would be Antonio Brown. I'm not saying he was a great man before, but he was playing football in the playoffs versus the Bengals. He had a route across the middle and took a massive hit to his head, causing him took the hit from his shoulder to his head, and then his head hit the ground really hard. So he had basically double brain hit. And if you look up Antonio Brown now, he does not seem like the same person who was able to keep a steady job in the NFL, be one of the best wide receivers in the league. He's just not that person anymore. He's not. Now, I'm not saying that Antonio Brown has a TBI. I'm not saying he wasn't crazy before. Not even, I'm like, I'm not defending him. That because he had that injury, he's allowed to do what he does. No. Nor was Henry. But I do think that when someone has something happen to them like that, while it doesn't excuse their actions, it may be able to explain it. So, Henry, shortly after Anne Boleyn's passing, or execution, he married Jane Seymour on May 30th, 1536. Jane was gentle, quiet, and traditional. She was the exact opposite of Anne Boleyn, and a lot more like his first wife. He married her just 11 days after Anne Boleyn's execution. In 1537, a little over a year after, within a year to a little over, after he got married to Jane Seymour, she gave Henry the one thing he wanted most, a healthy son, Edward the Sixth. Yeah, Edward the Sixth. But Jane died of infection soon after childbirth. Henry called her his true love, and for the rest of his life, he chose to be buried beside her. A lot of people consider this to be the last time Henry would ever seem truly happy. What he did to Anne Boleyn was not right. Having the traumatic brain injury and proceeding to lose the woman that he called his true love, that's a lot for a person to go through. It's a lot. And especially for him, he got the one thing he wanted most, a healthy son. Not saying that his motives were right, but maybe we can see how this tyrant became the man he is. So, After Jane Seymour passed away on October 24th, 1537, he became married to Anne of Cleves on January 6th, 1540. This marriage was strictly political. It was meant to form an alliance with the German Protestant states. Henry disliked her immediately, claiming that she looked nothing like her portrait, because that's how dating happened back then. Not anything like nowadays, right? It's not like people use Tinder where it's just off of pictures. But basically, it's the first form of Tinder. He saw a portrait of her, and he said that she looked nothing like her portrait. Their marriage, rumored to have never been consummated, and it was annulled just 6 months after. Annulled on July 9th, 1540. Anne smartly agreed peacefully, and Henry rewarded her with money, property, and the title King's beloved sister. To be honest, I think she got the best end of the deal. She outlived all of Henry's wives. She got money, property, so I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think she got the best end of the deal there. He then married his fifth wife, Catherine Howard. He married her on July 28th, 1540. Catherine Howard was young, rumored to be somewhere around 16, 17, 18, 19. She was in that teen range. She married a 49-year-old King Henry. She was just 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. She was described as lively, fun, affectionate, and Henry adored her. But court factions accused her of having past lovers and possibly a lover during her marriage. It's a little hard to tell because at the time, the writings can be a little bit misleading because we don't know if the writings are true or if they were fabricated. But whether they were true or politically weaponized, Henry was devastated and enraged. And because of that, Catherine was executed on February 13th, 1542. And from here, Henry's decline accelerated. He then married Catherine Parr. He married her on July 12th, 1543. Catherine Parr was intelligent, diplomatic, and deeply, deeply patient. And I think you'd have to be married King Henry and survive. So she acted basically as a nurse, a companion, and even a regent, ruling England while Henry was away at war. She helped reconcile Henry with his daughters Mary and Elizabeth and helped restore their place in the succession line. She survived him. Technically the only wife who did, even though, like we said earlier, what was her name? Anna Cleves did technically have the best end of the deal, in my opinion. Um, Now I want to touch on what King Henry did during his reign. We obviously, I think a lot of us know King Henry as a tyrant, as an awful person. Maybe you know about the wives because you've heard the divorced, beheaded, died. Wait, divorced, beheaded, died. Yep, divorced, beheaded, survived. Had to think about it. I think we all heard that. Maybe you've seen the Broadway musical Six. Um, so interesting fact. I'll take a second just to talk about this before continuing. The reason I wanted to talk about this is me and my wife are actually going to be going to London, and we heard that they have basically a Broadway equivalent there that shows the show Six. And I was like, that'd be really cool to dive deeper into King Henry VIII and just really see, was he the man that we remember him for his whole life, or did something happen? But I want to talk about some of the war the economy, and what he did with the church. So King Henry went to war with France and Scotland during his reign. Henry dreamed of being a warrior king like Henry V. Henry loved war. He especially wanted glory against France and Scotland, and he spent massive amounts of money, often more than England could afford. Now, I want to say this. He also sucked. Like, he would win some battles, but he never was able to conquer France. He won a couple battles here and there, and he just wasn't good at it. Just to be truthful, he wanted to be remembered as that. I think we all know he's not remembered for that, and there's a reason for it. One thing he did do well militarily was the Navy. Henry VIII built England's first true navy. One of the biggest things that he did right. He didn't do many right, but that's one of the biggest. And he built ships like the Mary Rose, and that transformed their coastal defense. Now, the church, like I talked about earlier, he split from it. And in that, to fund his campaigns, he dissolved monasteries, and he seized about a fourth of all the land in England. That's a lot of land. Fourth of the land. I think we all have seen England on a map. It's a lot of land. And he seized over 800 monasteries, stripping the Catholic Church of its land and wealth. So, some people maybe do know this or don't, but monasteries back then provided schools, hospitals, housing, and charity. And their destruction caused a social crisis. This change in England's economy, I don't know what just happened there. This change in England's economy permanently just created a new wealthy landowning class. At the time, gave the crown a huge revenue, destroyed centuries, I mean centuries, of religious institutions. And this fueled corruption and inequality in the country. England suddenly had thousands of homeless monks, nuns, and poor families with no safety net. Let's dive a little deeper into the economy. Henry spent money recklessly. Talked about that earlier. He debased the coinage and essentially shrunk the percentage of silver in the coins, causing massive inflation. His final years were marked by economic decline, social unrest, and religious confusion. But also, it created a more powerful monarchy than ever before. But financially, he left England nearly bankrupt. To be honest, they needed him to die so that way they could survive as a country. They were in very bad shape after King Henry VIII had his whole downfall. So by the 1540s, Henry was physically ruined thanks to his jousting accident. He weighed nearly 400 pounds. His ulcer leg required a mechanical device just to help him move. He was depressed, paranoid, and in constant pain. And on January 28th, 1547, at the age of 55, Henry VIII died at Whitehall Palace. He was buried beside Jane Seymour, wife who had given him a son. His true wife, as he liked to say, and his true love. His legacy is enormous, controversial, and permanently woven into the fabric of English history. The ripple effects are still felt today. He left behind 3 children who each would rule England for a time. First, there was Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I. Some of you might know, Elizabeth I became one of the greatest monarchs in the world's history. She was the last of his children to reign. He also left behind a broken church, a centralized monarchy, a changed economy for the worst, a scared nation, and one of the most controversial legacies of any ruler. Henry VIII is a tyrant, is remembered as a tyrant, as a romantic, as a warrior, and as a monster. But behind the legend is a complex man. It's not black or white, it's somewhere in the middle. He's not good, he's not evil. He's somewhere in the middle. He had good moments, he had bad moments. And his bad moments were very bad. I'm not saying that he has as many good moments as bad moments. No, I'm not saying that. But he had good moments, he had good things, he had good ideas. But he also had bad ones too. He was a brilliant and talented man in his youth. But then he was broken by injury, obsession, fear, and power as he aged. His decisions reshaped England's religion, politics, and social order. And like I said, the effects are still felt to this day. I just want to say thank you for traveling through time with me. If you enjoyed this journey through the Tudors, England, subscribe for a more deep dive into history and more fascinating stories. This is Peyton's Time Machine, where history comes alive. I do want to add something. I mentioned earlier uh, Tudor England and how Henry didn't want his legacy to end with the Tudors. If he didn't, he said if he didn't have a son, the Tudors would end. Well, he did have a son, and ironically, after his son passed away, and after Mary and Elizabeth the first came through, his legacy did end. There were not any more Tudors who came to the throne. So, just a little interesting fact there. He didn't want it to end, and the very thing he didn't want it happened. But I would like to say if you would leave a like if you liked the video, subscribe. If you want to hear more content, I plan on coming out with 1 to 2 videos a week about different history topics. I'm trying to decide what I want to do for the next one, which will probably come out Saturday. Um, but if you have a topic you want me to talk about, it doesn't have to be mainstream history. It can be very obscure. I love obscure history. Um, I'd love to take some time to talk about it, but if you could just leave that in the comments to let me know what you want to watch, if you enjoyed the video, if there's anything that you think I can improve on, please let me know. Thank you guys for watching. Have a good one.